The moment Isabella Walker stepped into the grand ballroom of the Westfield Plaza Hotel, she knew her life was about to change forever. At 28, she had finally secured a position as the lead event coordinator for one of the most prestigious hotels in New York City. Tonight's charity gala would either cement her reputation or destroy everything she had worked for. "Isabella, there you are!" Richard Westfield's booming voice carried across the room. "The governor's wife just called. They're running 15 minutes late." Isabella nodded, already recalculating the evening's timeline in her head. Richard Westfield was not just her boss, he was the hotel's owner and one of the most powerful businessmen in the city. At 55, with silver-streaked dark hair and piercing blue eyes, he commanded every room he entered. "I've already spoken to the chef, Mr. Westfield. The first course will be delayed accordingly, and I've instructed the orchestra to extend their opening set." Richard's approving smile sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "This is why I hired you, Isabella. Always 3 steps ahead." As he walked away, Isabella forced herself to focus on the task at hand. The ballroom gleamed with crystal chandeliers and meticulously arranged white roses. Every detail had been personally overseen by her, from the hand-calligraphed place cards to the precise timing of the evening's entertainment. Someone's made quite an impression. Sophia Martinez, Isabella's assistant and closest friend, appeared at her side with a knowing smirk. The great Richard Westfield doesn't compliment just anyone. Isabella felt her cheeks warm. It's professional respect, nothing more. "And I'm the Queen of England?" Sophia adjusted an arrangement of roses. "Just be careful, Bella. Men like him are used to getting what they want." "There's nothing to be careful about," Isabella insisted, though her eyes involuntarily tracked Richard as he greeted guests across the room. "Besides, isn't he engaged to that French model? Elise something? Elise Dubois. And rumors say that relationship is on the rocks." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Just saying." Before Isabella could respond, her earpiece crackled. "The governor's car just pulled up," a staff member announced. The next few hours passed in a blur of orchestrated perfection. Isabella moved through the crowd with practiced grace, solving minor crises before most guests even noticed them. The auction raised record funds for children's education, the 5-course dinner received enthusiastic praise, and even the notoriously critical food columnist from the New York Times seemed impressed. It was nearly midnight when Isabella finally allowed herself a moment of respite on the hotel's rooftop garden. The Manhattan skyline sparkled before her, a beautiful backdrop to the evening's success. "Hiding from your own triumph?" Richard's voice startled her. He approached with 2 champagne flutes, offering one to her. "Just catching my breath," she admitted, accepting the glass. "Thank you." "No, thank you, Isabella. Tonight exceeded every expectation." He stood beside her, their shoulders almost touching as they gazed at the city lights. "You have an extraordinary talent." She took a small sip of champagne, the bubbles matching the effervescence in her chest. "I'm just doing my job." "We both know it's more than that." His voice had softened, and when she turned to look at him, the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "You transform spaces, experiences, people." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Isabella knew she should step back, maintain professional boundaries, but something held her in place. Curiosity, perhaps, or something deeper she wasn't ready to name. "Mr. Westfield." "Richard," he corrected gently. "After hours, at least." "Richard," she conceded. "I should check on the remaining guests." He nodded, though neither moved immediately. "Of course, duty calls." When Isabella finally walked away, her heart was racing, for reasons entirely unrelated to her job. The following weeks brought a subtle but unmistakable shift in their relationship. Richard sought her input on hotel renovations, invited her to meetings well above her pay grade, and found reasons to work late whenever she did. Each interaction deepened their connection, built on mutual respect but increasingly tinged with something more dangerous. "He's grooming you for something bigger," Sophia suggested one afternoon as they prepared for a corporate conference. "Maybe he wants to expand the events division with you at the helm." Isabella wanted to believe that was all it was, professional mentorship, nothing more. But the way her pulse quickened when he entered a room told a different story. The situation came to a head during a business trip to the Westfield property in Miami. Isabella had been sent to oversee a celebrity wedding with Richard, unexpectedly announcing he would join to meet with potential investors. On their final evening, after a successfully executed wedding and a signed investment deal, Richard invited Isabella to dinner on his private yacht. "Is this appropriate?" she asked as they boarded, the Miami sunset painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Richard's smile was disarming. "It's a celebration of our successful partnership. Nothing more, unless—" He let the sentence hang between them, an open door she could choose to walk through or firmly close. The evening was magical. Fine wine, exquisite food prepared by a private chef, and conversation that flowed effortlessly from work to art to their personal philosophies. Richard was surprisingly vulnerable, sharing stories of his humble beginnings and the drive that built his empire. "What about Elise?" Isabella finally asked as they sat beneath the stars, the yacht gently rocking with the waves. Richard's expression darkened momentarily. "That relationship has been over for months, though the public announcement is pending some contractual matters." He set down his wineglass. "I've been waiting for the right time to move forward and in many aspects of my life." When he kissed her, Isabella knew she should pull away. Every rational thought screamed caution, but her heart hammered with different demands. His lips were soft yet insistent, his hand gentle as it cradled her face. "I've wanted to do that since the moment you walked into my office for your interview," he confessed, his forehead resting against hers. "This is complicated," she whispered. "The best things usually are." That night marked the beginning of a secret relationship. Stolen moments in his office, weekend getaways disguised as business trips, and whispered promises of a future together once the time was right. Isabella found herself falling deeply, intoxicated by not just his wealth and power, but his brilliant mind and the vulnerability he showed only to her. 6 months into their clandestine romance, Richard proposed during a private dinner at his penthouse. The 5-carat diamond ring caught the candlelight as he slipped it onto her finger. "We'll announce our engagement properly after the quarterly shareholders meeting," he promised. "Just 2 more weeks of discretion." Isabella floated through those 2 weeks in a haze of joy, planning their life together, imagining the day they could finally be public with their love. Sophia remained skeptical but supportive, while Isabella began secretly searching for her replacement at work, assuming she would need to step down to avoid conflicts of interest. The night before the shareholders meeting, Isabella received a cryptic text from Richard. "Need to see you. Come to the penthouse at 8. Use the private elevator." Her heart light. She dressed carefully in a blue silk dress he had once complimented, her engagement ring tucked safely in her purse until they could announce their news to the world. The penthouse was strangely quiet when she arrived, lit only by the city lights streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Richard," she called, setting down her purse on the marble entryway table. She heard voices from his home office, a woman's voice, followed by Richard's deeper tones. Curiosity propelled her forward, though something in her chest tightened with inexplicable dread. The office door was ajar, offering a sliver of visibility into the room. What Isabella saw through that narrow opening shattered her world into 1,000 glittering pieces, sharp as the diamond that suddenly felt heavy in her purse. Through the sliver of the open door, Isabella's world collapsed in slow motion. Richard sat behind his mahogany desk, but he wasn't alone. Élise Dubois, the supposedly ex-fiancée, perched on the edge of the desk, her long legs crossed elegantly, one hand resting possessively on Richard's shoulder. Their body language spoke of intimacy, comfort, and a shared history that contradicted everything he had told Isabella. "The arrangements are finalized," Élise was saying, her French accent more pronounced in private than in her perfume commercials. "The wedding announcement goes out after the shareholders meeting, and the ceremony is set for June at your Hamptons estate." "Perfect," Richard nodded, taking Elise's hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "The board is thrilled about the merger with your father's luxury brand. This union will double our market share in Europe." And your little event planner. Elise's voice turned sharp. You've ended that distraction. Richard laughed, the sound like ice water down Isabella's spine. She serves her purpose. The hotel's event revenue has increased 30%. Under her management, and she's completely devoted to me and by extension to Westfield Enterprises. That wasn't my question, Richard. Elise's perfectly manicured fingers traced his jawline. You promised it was just a fling, entertainment during our strategic separation. And it was. Richard's dismissive tone cut deeper than any knife. Isabella is ambitious but naive. She believes we have a future together, which keeps her motivated to excel. After the merger announcement, I'll move her to our Chicago property, a promotion that conveniently relocates her far from New York. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth to stifle the sound threatening to escape. The ring in her purse now burned like a brand. Of humiliation. She thinks we're announcing our engagement tomorrow, Richard continued, chuckling. I've let her plan her little fantasy. You are deliciously cruel, mon amour. Elise leaned down to kiss him deeply. Isabella backed away silently, her mind racing to process the betrayal. 6 months of promises, of planning a future, of believing herself special, all a calculated manipulation to boost hotel profits and keep her compliant. The private elevator descended with excruciating slowness. Isabella leaned against the wall, her reflection in the polished brass panels showing a woman she barely recognized, pale, shaken, eyes wide with shock. By the time she reached the lobby, shock had hardened into something colder, sharper. She walked through the opulent hotel that had once represented her greatest professional achievement. Now every crystal chandelier, every marble column seemed to mock her naivety. Staff members nodded respectfully as she passed, unaware that their boss had used and discarded their colleague like a disposable asset. Isabella? Sophia called from the front desk, concern immediate in her expression. What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. Isabella managed a brittle smile. Not now. I'll call you later. Once safely in her apartment, Isabella finally allowed herself to crumble. Sobs racked her body as the full impact of Richard's betrayal sank in. She had compromised her professional ethics, rearranged her entire life, all for a man who had been playing her from the beginning. The diamond ring sat accusingly on her coffee table. She considered dramatic gestures, flinging it into the Hudson, mailing it back with a scathing letter, or confronting Richard publicly at tomorrow's meeting. Instead, she placed it carefully in its velvet box. The ring wasn't just jewelry, it was evidence of Richard's duplicity. By morning, grief had crystallized into determination. Isabella went to work early, her red-rimmed eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. She downloaded crucial files, gathered documentation of her contributions to the hotel's success, and cleared personal items from her office. Going somewhere? Sophia appeared in the doorway, watching Isabella pack a small box. I need your help, Isabella said quietly. And your absolute discretion. Within an hour, Sophia understood everything. Her initial "I told you so" faded quickly into fierce loyalty. That manipulative bastard, she hissed. The board needs to know what kind of man they're trusting with. Their investments. Isabella shook her head. Richard's too powerful and it would be my word against his. I need to be smarter than that. She straightened her shoulders. I need to secure my future first. The shareholders' meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the hotel's grand ballroom. Ironically, a space Isabella had personally redesigned during her tenure. At 1:30, she positioned herself in a service corridor with a clear view of the entrance, watching as New York's business elite arrived. Among them was Victor Chen, owner of the rival Jade Dynasty Hotels and Richard's most formidable competitor. Isabella had met him several times at industry events, always maintaining professional courtesy despite the corporate rivalry. Taking a deep breath, she approached him as he checked his phone in a quiet corner of the lobby. Mr. Chen, here's a moment. Of your time, please? Victor looked up, recognition flickering in his eyes. Ms. Walker, interesting to see Westfield's star employee approaching me on today of all days. I believe we might have mutual interests to discuss. Isabella kept her voice steady. particularly regarding the true nature of the Westfield-Dubois merger. Victor's expression remained neutral, but his attention sharpened. "You have 5 minutes." Those 5 minutes changed everything. Isabella laid out what she knew of the merger plans, details she had gleaned from months at Richard's side, information that would give Victor's team a significant advantage in countering Richard's European expansion. "Why are you telling me this?" Victor asked, studying her with calculated interest. "Because I'm looking for new opportunities," Isabella replied evenly, "and because I believe business should be conducted with integrity." A slight smile touched Victor's lips, refreshing perspective. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I've increased Westfield's event revenue by 30% in 18 months, Isabella stated, handing him a thumb drive with supporting data. "I can do the same for Jade Dynasty, with the added advantage of intimate knowledge of how your primary competitor operates." Victor pocketed the drive. "And your current contract contains no non-compete clause." "I checked. Twice." "Smart woman." Victor glanced at his watch. "We should continue this conversation elsewhere. Are you free for dinner tonight?" "Actually," Isabella said, her first genuine smile in 24 hours forming, "I have a shareholders' meeting to attend first." Isabella slipped into the ballroom just as Richard took the podium. Elise seated prominently in the front row. He looked momentarily startled to see Isabella take a seat beside Victor Chen, but recovered quickly, launching into his presentation about record profits and strategic growth. "And now," Richard announced, approaching the climax of his speech, "I'm thrilled to share some personally significant news that will also represent a tremendous business opportunity for Westfield Enterprises." He extended his hand toward Elise, who rose gracefully to join him at the podium. "Ms. Elise Dubois and I are pleased to announce our engagement, which will coincide with a merger between Westfield Hotels and Dubois Luxury Brands." Polite applause filled the room. Isabella watched impassively as Richard continued outlining the merger benefits, describing how wedding festivities would double as strategic networking events for both companies' elite clientele. When the formal presentation concluded and attendees broke into networking clusters, Isabella made her move. She approached Richard and Elise with Victor Chen beside her. "Congratulations on your engagement," she said, her voice carrying just far enough to attract attention from nearby board members. "Elise, I believe this means the private wedding planning sessions I've been conducting with Richard for the past 6 months won't be necessary after all." Richard's face paled. Elise's perfect smile froze in place. "Isabella," Richard warned quietly. "No need to explain," Isabella continued pleasantly. "I understand business decisions sometimes require personal sacrifices." She turned to Victor. "Mr. Chen has just offered me the position of Director of Global Events for Jade Dynasty Hotels. I'll be overseeing their expansion into the European luxury market." The implications weren't lost on the board members within earshot. Richard's hand tightened around his champagne flute. "You'll regret this," he murmured for her ears only. Isabella leaned in, her smile never wavering. "Not as much as you will. Check your private email before you make any threats." As she walked away, she heard Elise's hissed questions and the concerned murmurs of board members. The evidence she had emailed Richard minutes before, recordings of their private conversations, documentation of how he had used their relationship to manipulate her work performance, wouldn't destroy him completely, but it would make any retaliation extremely unwise. That evening, over dinner with Victor Chen at an exclusive restaurant overlooking Central Park, Isabella began planning her professional resurrection. Victor proved to be everything Richard was not: straightforward about his expectations, clear about the business relationship he envisioned, and refreshingly honest about his own past failures. "Why did you really approach me today?" Victor asked as they discussed the details of her new contract. "You could have simply resigned and found another position without the dramatic confrontation." Isabella considered the question carefully. "Because staying silent would have made me complicit in my own deception, and because sometimes, Mr. Chen, the most powerful move isn't revenge, it's simply refusing to play by someone else's rules." "Call me Victor," he said, raising his glass in a toast. To new beginnings and better rules. As they clinked glasses, Isabella's phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. Westfield stock dropped 3% after rumors of internal conflicts at today's meeting. You're my hero. For the first time in 24 hours, Isabella felt the weight on her chest begin to lift. The road ahead would be challenging, but she had survived the worst betrayal of her life and emerged with her dignity and future intact. What she didn't yet realize was that Richard Westfield never accepted defeat gracefully, and that her escape from his influence had only just begun. 6 months into her role at Jade Dynasty Hotels, Isabella Walker had transformed from betrayed lover to formidable business force. Under her direction, the company's events division had secured contracts with 3 major luxury brands that had previously been Westfield exclusives. Her innovative approach to corporate retreats had been featured in Hospitality Monthly, and her redesign of the Chicago Jade Dynasty property had increased bookings by 40%. The London expansion is ahead of schedule, Isabella reported, standing before Victor Chen and his executive team in the Manhattan headquarters. We've secured the Kensington property and begun renovations. I project we'll be operational 2 months before Westfield opens their Mayfair location. Victor nodded approvingly. Excellent work, Isabella. This puts us in position to capture the market before Richard can establish a foothold. The rivalry between Jade Dynasty and Westfield Enterprises had intensified since Isabella's defection. Richard's European expansion plans had faced unexpected hurdles, permits mysteriously delayed, potential properties suddenly unavailable, and key staff recruited away, all bearing subtle fingerprints of someone intimately familiar with his strategies. Isabella never directly mentioned Richard in professional settings, but his shadow loomed over her meteoric rise. Each success felt like both personal vindication and a strategic countermove in their unspoken chess match. After the ETE meeting, Victor invited Isabella to his office overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The board is impressed, he said, gesturing for her to take a seat. They've approved your promotion to Vice President of Global Development, effective immediately. Isabella's breath caught. Thank you. That's sooner than I expected. You've earned it. Victor handed her a folder containing her new contract. But there's something else we need to discuss. Isabella tensed, years of working in corporate environments having taught her that such transitions rarely came without complications. Richard Westfield has been making inquiries about you, Victor said, his expression carefully neutral, discreet, ones through mutual connections. What kind of inquiries? Isabella kept her voice level despite the sudden chill in her veins. The kind that suggest he's not simply gathering competitive intelligence. Victor leaned forward. Has he contacted you directly? Isabella hesitated. She hadn't told anyone about the elegant white orchid that had arrived at her apartment last week, her favorite flower, which only Richard knew, accompanied by a card bearing only the words, "Unfinished business." The gesture had been disturbing enough for her to upgrade her building's security. Not exactly, she finally answered, but I've had indications that he hasn't forgotten our history. Victor's expression darkened. Isabella, I value your contributions to Jade Dynasty immensely, but I need to know if your personal situation with Westfield presents any risk to our operations. The implication was clear. Her rapid advancement within the company had been partly due to her value in the corporate war with Westfield. If that connection became a liability rather than an asset, her position could be compromised. There's no risk, she assured him firmly. Whatever Richard's intentions, they're irrelevant to my work here. Victor studied her for a moment longer before nodding. Good, because we're about to raise the stakes considerably. He outlined Jade Dynasty's most ambitious plan yet, a complete buyout of Dubois Luxury Brands, the very company Richard had planned to merge with through his engagement to Elise. The French conglomerate had been struggling financially since the Westfield merger fell through, making them vulnerable to acquisition. If we succeed, Victor explained, we'll control the luxury hotel markets in both Asia and Europe. Westfield will be effectively boxed out of international expansion for years. Isabella recognized the ruthlessness of the strategy and the personal devastation it would bring to Richard, whose entire business model revolved around global growth. The fee. Dubois family is notoriously loyal, she noted. What makes you think they'll sell to us? Victor's smile held a hint of mischief. Because you're going to convince them. 2 weeks later, Isabella found herself in Paris, seated across from Henri, Dubois, Elise's father and the aging patriarch of the Dubois Empire. The elegant restaurant overlooking the Seine provided a discreet setting for their conversation. "Miss Walker," Henri said, his accent thick but his English precise, "I admit I was curious when Victor Chen said you would be presenting this proposal. Your history with Richard Westfield is known to me." Isabella maintained her professional composure. "My previous association with Mr. Westfield gives me unique insight into why a partnership with Jade Dynasty would benefit Dubois brands far more than Westfield ever could." Over the next hour, Isabella outlined the proposal with meticulous attention to both financial details and strategic vision. She emphasized the compatibility of the Asian luxury market with French high fashion, the preservation of the Dubois legacy within the new corporate structure, and most importantly, the creative control that would remain with the Dubois family. Westfield's approach was absorption, not alliance, she concluded. Jade Dynasty offers true partnership. Henri studied her with shrewd eyes. "My daughter speaks of you, you know, not kindly." Isabella didn't flinch. "I imagine not, but this discussion isn't about personal histories, Monsieur Dubois. It's about the future of your family's legacy." "Perhaps," Henri mused, "but character is relevant in business partnerships. Elise claims you tried to manipulate Richard, that you pursued him despite knowing of their arrangement." The accusation stung, but Isabella had long since prepared for such tactics. She opened her portfolio and slid across several documents, emails, calendar invitations, and photos documenting the timeline of her relationship with Richard, alongside his simultaneous planning with Elise. "I was the one manipulated, Monsieur Dubois. But I learned a valuable lesson about due diligence." She closed the portfolio. "Which is why I've thoroughly researched the financial state of Dubois brands before proposing this partnership." Henri's expression shifted as he recognized her. Implied message. She knew his company was in far worse financial condition than publicly acknowledged. "You are formidable, Ms. Walker," he conceded. "Let us continue this discussion tomorrow with our respective legal teams." 3 days later, Isabella boarded a flight back to New York with a signed letter of intent for Jade Dynasty's acquisition of Dubois luxury brands. The business press would explode once the news went public, and Richard Westfield would face his greatest corporate setback in decades. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Isabella finally allowed herself a moment of pure satisfaction. The scared, betrayed woman who had stumbled from Richard's penthouse a year ago had transformed into someone even she barely recognized, someone powerful, strategic, and unafraid. Her phone chimed with a message from an unlisted number. Her satisfaction evaporated as she read the text. "Congratulations on Paris. We should celebrate your success. I miss your ambition almost as much as I miss your touch. R." Isabella deleted the message, her hands steady but her mind racing. Richard's persistent attention was evolving from annoyance to genuine concern. The white orchid, the messages, the sense of being watched in public spaces, all suggested an obsession rather than mere professional rivalry. Upon landing in New York, another surprise awaited. The business news channels were already reporting the Dubois acquisition, but with an unexpected twist. Anonymous sources claimed Isabella Walker had used intimate knowledge obtained during her affair with Richard Westfield to orchestrate the deal, potentially violating confidentiality agreements. By the time she reached her apartment, 3 messages from Victor Chen awaited, each more urgent than the last. The final one read simply, "Damage control meeting, 8 a.m. tomorrow." Isabella barely slept that night. The leak had Richard's fingerprints all over it, a calculated move to undermine both her professional reputation and the legitimacy of the Dubois acquisition. If it gained traction, the deal could collapse, and her position at Jade Dynasty would be compromised. Morning brought another shock. As Isabella prepared for the crisis meeting, Sophia called, her voice tense. "Have you seen the post?" she demanded without preamble. "Not yet," Isabella replied, dread pooling in her stomach. Page 6. There's a story about you and Richard. Photos, Isabella. Isabella's blood ran cold. "What photos? There can't be anything recent." "Not recent," Sophia confirmed. "From Miami. From the yacht. Private moments from their relationship, apparently documented without her knowledge, now splashed across New York's most notorious gossip page. The accompanying article painted Isabella as a calculating seductress who had used her relationship with Richard to steal corporate secrets before defecting to the competition. When Isabella arrived at Jade Dynasty headquarters, she found Victor Chen already in damage control mode, on a conference call with their legal team. "This is a coordinated attack," she stated as she entered the room. "Richard's retaliating for the Dubois deal." Victor ended his call and turned to her, his expression grave. "The timing suggests that yes, but it creates serious complications regardless of motive." The next hours were a blur of strategy sessions, legal consultations, and crisis management. The Dubois family was threatening to withdraw from the acquisition, citing ethical concerns. Jade Dynasty's stock had dropped 7 points, and the business media was running wild with speculations about corporate espionage and personal vendettas. By evening, Isabella stood alone at the window of her office, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled over Manhattan. Everything she had built over the past year was threatening to crumble. Richard had calculated his attack perfectly, targeting not just her reputation, but the very structure of trust she had built at Jade Dynasty. Her phone rang, Victor's private line. "The board wants distance," he said without preamble. "They're suggesting a leave of absence until this blows over." Isabella closed her eyes briefly. "And you? What do you suggest?" Victor's sigh was heavy. "I think Richard Westfield won't stop until he's destroyed everything you've built with us. The question is whether you're going to let him." "I've never let anyone destroy me," Isabella replied, her voice hardening. "And I'm not about to start now." After they hung up, Isabella made another call to someone she had deliberately avoided contacting for months. "Elise Dubois, please," she requested when the assistant answered. "Tell her Isabella Walker is calling about Richard Westfield's true intentions for Dubois Brands." There was a long pause before Elise's cool voice came on the line. "This is a surprise, Miss Walker. I wouldn't have thought you'd have the audacity to contact me directly." "Desperate times, Ms. Dubois," Isabella replied evenly. "I think we may have more in common than either of us would like to admit. And what might that be?" "We've both been underestimated and manipulated by Richard Westfield." Isabella took a deep breath. "And I believe we both deserve the chance to write our own endings to that story." A longer pause followed. "I'm listening," Elise finally said. As Isabella outlined her proposal, she felt a curious sense of destiny unfolding. The very forces that had nearly destroyed her were about to become the foundation for her greatest triumph, if she could convince her most unlikely ally to join forces against their common adversary. The private dining room at Le Bernardin hummed with tension. Isabella sat perfectly still as Elise Dubois studied her across the table, the Frenchwoman's expression unreadable behind her Chanel sunglasses. "You understand," Elise finally said, removing her glasses deliberately, "that I have every reason to distrust you." "As I have every reason to distrust you," Isabella countered evenly. "Yet here we are." Their unlikely alliance had been forged over 3 clandestine meetings in the past week, each woman initially motivated by suspicion, gradually giving way to reluctant recognition of their shared predicament. "My father is livid about the scandal," Elise confided, sipping her mineral water. "He believes Richard planted those stories to sabotage the Jade Dynasty deal after failing to secure Dubois for himself." Isabella nodded. "Victor thinks the same. The question is why Richard is suddenly so determined to destroy both our reputations. Perhaps because he's about to announce something significant," Elise suggested, sliding a heavy cream envelope across the table. "This arrived yesterday. Inside was an invitation to the grand opening of Westfield's newest property, a spectacular resort in the Maldives, representing Richard's first major expansion since the Dubois merger fell through. The handwritten note on the invitation read, "Elise, I hope you'll reconsider our personal and professional possibilities. Some partnerships are destined, despite temporary detours. Richard." "He sent you one as well, I presume?" Elise asked, arching a perfect eyebrow. Isabella shook her head. "Not yet, but I received this." She unlocked her phone and showed Elise an email from Richard sent that morning. "Isabella, the Maldives opening will make global headlines. Your presence would make it unforgettable. Last chance for us to rewrite our ending. Consider carefully. R." Elise's laugh was sharp and without humor. "He's playing us against each other again." "He believes one of us will capitulate," Isabella agreed. "Return to the fold on his terms, and destroy the other in the process." Elise's perfectly manicured nails tapped thoughtfully against the tablecloth. "What exactly are you proposing, Ms. Walker?" Isabella leaned forward. "I believe Richard's true vulnerability lies in his reputation, the carefully cultivated image of invincibility that attracts investors and intimidates competitors. If that image were to crack publicly, you want to humiliate him. It wasn't a question." "I want justice," Isabella corrected, "for both of us. And I believe the Maldives opening gives us the perfect opportunity." Elise tilted her head, studying Isabella with new interest. "You're suggesting we both attend together?" Isabella nodded, "but not as rivals, as allies who have discovered Richard's duplicity and refuse to be pawns in his game any longer." A slow smile spread across Elise's face, the first genuine one Isabella had seen from her. "It would certainly make headlines. More importantly," Isabella continued, "it would shift the narrative. No longer would we be portrayed as victims or schemers, but as savvy businesswomen who recognized manipulation and chose to reclaim our power." Over the next hour, they refined their strategy. Elise would accept Richard's invitation and hint at reconciliation possibilities. Isabella would appear to distance herself from Jade Dynasty, suggesting vulnerability and potential willingness to negotiate with Westfield. Meanwhile, they would meticulously gather evidence of Richard's attempts to manipulate them both simultaneously. "What about your position at Jade Dynasty?" Elise asked as they finalized their plan. "Won't this jeopardize it further?" "Victor knows what I'm doing," Isabella admitted. "He's skeptical, but willing to wait and see. If we succeed, Jade Dynasty benefits tremendously from Westfield's damaged reputation. And if we fail," Isabella met her gaze directly, "then I lose everything I've built. But I'd rather fail on my own terms than succeed on Richard's." Elise nodded slowly, a new respect visible in her eyes. "Then let us make sure we don't fail." The next 3 weeks passed in a careful dance of deception. Isabella took a public leave of absence from Jade Dynasty, citing personal reasons. Elise was photographed having lunch with Richard in London, smiling enigmatically when asked by the press about rekindling their relationship. Behind the scenes, they documented every communication from Richard, his increasingly transparent attempts to play them against each other, his promises to each that the other was merely a business pawn, and his simultaneous courtship of both women and their respective business connections. The evening of the Maldives resort opening arrived with all the spectacle Richard Westfield was famous for. Private jets ferried celebrities, business moguls, and press to the remote island paradise. The property itself was breathtaking, a masterpiece of sustainable luxury with overwater bungalows, underwater dining, and a spa that seemed to float between sea and sky. Isabella arrived early, her heart pounding as she stepped from the seaplane onto the resort's elegant welcome dock. She wore a midnight blue gown that contrasted dramatically with her pale skin and dark hair, a dress selected not for Richard's pleasure but for the photographs that would inevitably document the evening. "Ms. Walker, welcome to Westfield Maldives." Richard himself appeared to greet her, impeccable in a white linen suit. His smile held triumph as he took her hand. "I knew you'd come. How could I resist seeing your greatest achievement?" She replied, her voice steady despite the loathing that rose in her throat. His hand at the small of her back guided her toward the main pavilion. "We have much to discuss later," he murmured. "I have a private proposition I believe will interest you greatly." Isabella smiled enigmatically. "I look forward to it." The reception was a dizzying display of wealth and influence. Isabella navigated the crowd with practiced ease, accepting congratulations from those who assumed her presence signaled reconciliation with Richard, carefully deflecting questions about her future with either Westfield or Jade Dynasty. She spotted Elise across the room, resplendent in crimson, surrounded by French fashion elite. Their eyes met briefly, a silent confirmation that everything was proceeding according to plan. Near midnight, Richard took to the stage for his official address. The crowd hushed as he outlined his vision for Westfield's global expansion, with the Maldives property representing just the beginning of a new luxury frontier. "Success in our industry requires not just vision, but strategic partnerships," he announced, his charismatic confidence filling the space. "Which is why I'm thrilled to share that this evening marks not just the opening of our most ambitious property, but the beginning of Westfield's most ambitious chapter." He gestured toward the crowd. "I'd like to invite a very special guest to join me on stage, someone whose presence tonight represents both personal reconciliation and professional collaboration that will reshape the luxury hotel landscape." Isabella tensed, her gaze finding Elise across the room. This wasn't part of their intelligence. Richard was clearly planning to announce a renewed partnership with one of them, publicly undermining their alliance before it could even be revealed. "Elise Dubois," Richard called, extending his hand toward the crowd. Murmurs rippled through the gathering as Elise made her way to the stage, her expression composed but unreadable. Richard took her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture of gallantry that made Isabella's stomach turn. "Many of you know that Elise and I were once engaged," Richard continued smoothly. "What you may not know is that we've been in discussions about reuniting our personal and professional lives in a partnership that will combine Westfield's global reach with the unparalleled luxury heritage of Dubois brands." Isabella watched in growing horror as Richard produced a small velvet box from his pocket. The plan was unraveling before her eyes if Elise accepted his public proposal. Their carefully constructed strategy would collapse entirely. "Elise," Richard said, his voice carrying throughout the silent pavilion, "will you—" "Before you continue, Richard," Elise interrupted with remarkable poise, "there's someone else who should join us for this moment." Her eyes found Isabella in the crowd. "Isabella Walker, would you please come up?" A confused murmur swept through the audience. Richard's expression flickered between confusion and alarm as Isabella made her way to the stage, every step deliberate and unhurried. "What are you doing?" Richard hissed to Elise as Isabella joined them. Elise's smile was diamond-sharp. "Ensuring transparency, darling. Isn't that what partnerships are built on?" Isabella addressed the crowd, her voice clear and steady. "Mr. Westfield invited me here tonight as well, with remarkably similar promises of both personal reconciliation and professional partnership." The murmurs grew louder. Richard's face hardened as he attempted to regain control. "Ladies and gentlemen, there seems to be some confusion." "No confusion at all," Elise cut in smoothly, taking Isabella's hand in a show of solidarity that sent flashbulbs popping throughout the pavilion. Just two women who discovered they were being manipulated by the same man for the same purpose, advancing his business interests through whatever personal deceptions necessary. Isabella removed her phone from her clutch and held it up. "In fact, we've created a digital archive of Mr. Westfield's simultaneous courtship of us both, professionally and personally, over the past month alone." Richard lunged for the phone, but stopped short as cameras focused on him. "This is absurd," he sputtered. "A vindictive stunt by two business competitors who found common ground," Isabella suggested coolly. "Or perhaps just women tired of being underestimated and exploited." From the edge of the stage, Isabella could see Victor Chen watching with undisguised admiration. Beside him stood Henri Dubois, his expression inscrutable but his attention fixed on his daughter's defiant stance. "The real announcement tonight," Elise continued, her accent more pronounced in her conviction, "is the formation of a new venture. Dubois Walker. International, a luxury hospitality and lifestyle brand that will partner with Jade Dynasty to create truly ethical luxury experiences worldwide. The shock rippling through the crowd was palpable. Richard's face had gone from flushed to ashen as he realized the full scope of their countermove. "You can't do this," he said, his public persona slipping to reveal the calculating man beneath. "The contracts, the non-competes, have all been reviewed by our legal teams," Isabella assured him. "Unlike you, Richard, we've been meticulous about documentation." She turned to address the crowd directly. "Including documentation of Mr. Westfield's attempts to undermine competitors through personal manipulation and planted media stories." Cameras flashed incessantly as Richard stood frozen between the two women he had tried to control. In that moment, his carefully constructed empire of intimidation began to crumble visibly. The aftermath unfolded with the speed and intensity of a summer storm. By morning, business news worldwide carried the story of Richard Westfield's public humiliation and the surprise announcement of the Dubois Walker venture. Westfield stock plummeted as investors questioned Richard's judgment and ethics. Meanwhile, both Jade Dynasty and Dubois brands saw immediate value increases as markets responded to their innovative partnership structure. 1 week after the Maldives incident, Isabella sat in Victor Chen's office in New York, finalizing her transition. She would remain a strategic advisor to Jade Dynasty while stepping into her role as co-CEO of Dubois Walker International. "I never would have predicted this outcome," Victor admitted, signing the final agreement. "Elise Dubois was the last person I expected you to ally with." Isabella smiled. "Sometimes our greatest strengths come from unexpected sources. Elise and I may have begun as rivals, but we discovered we're remarkably compatible business partners once we removed Richard from the equation." "And speaking of Richard," Victor said cautiously, "the SEC has opened an investigation into some of Westfield's recent business practices based on information that appears to have come from your digital archive." Isabella kept her expression neutral. How unfortunate for him. As she left Jade Dynasty headquarters for the last time, Isabella paused to look back at the Manhattan skyline, the same view she had contemplated during her darkest moment a year earlier, when Richard's betrayal had threatened to destroy everything she valued. Her phone chimed with a message from Elise. "Paris office lease signed, London next week, then Milan, the empire rises." Isabella smiled as she typed her response, "And all on our own terms." That evening, as she packed for her flight to Paris, a familiar white orchid arrived at her door, Richard's signature gesture. The card read simply, "This isn't over." Isabella placed the flower on her entryway table, neither keeping nor discarding it, a reminder of where she had been and how far she had come. She had no doubt Richard would attempt to retaliate. Men like him always did. But she was no longer the woman who had been blindsided by his manipulation. She was stronger, wiser, and most importantly, no longer alone in her fight. She picked up her phone and sent one final message, not to Elise or Victor, but to Richard himself. "You're right. It's not over. It's just beginning." Then she turned off her phone, closed her suitcase, and stepped into the future she had created from the ashes of betrayal. A future built not on revenge, but on reclamation of her own power and the creation of something genuinely new. In boardrooms and business schools for years to come, the Walker-Dubois alliance would be studied as a masterclass in turning adversity into advantage. But for Isabella, the true victory was simpler. She had written her own ending, on her own terms, and discovered that the most powerful partnerships were those built on truth rather than deception, strength rather than vulnerability, and mutual respect rather than manipulation. As her plane took off toward Paris the next morning, Isabella Walker closed her eyes and finally allowed herself to feel the full magnitude of her triumph, not over Richard, but over the fear and self-doubt that had once made her vulnerable to him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them not as a victim seeking justice, but as a visionary creating her own legacy. The story of Isabella Walker was no longer defined by the man who had betrayed her, but by the woman she had become in spite of him. And that was a story worth telling. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope you've been captivated by Isabella's journey from betrayal to triumph. To continue experiencing powerful stories of resilience and reinvention, we've prepared a special playlist with equally compelling narratives. Find it by clicking the link to your left. If you enjoyed this tale of business intrigue and personal redemption, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring you unique stories that explore the complexities of human relationships and the strength we find within ourselves. Don't miss our upcoming content. We have many more emotional journeys waiting to be shared. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below.